Should Alberto Gonzales resign? That's what the Republicans have been saying lately. Oddly enough, some very right-wing Republicans have been calling vociferously for Gonzales to resign. Senators Tom Coburn and Jeff Sessions. These guys are very, very right-wing, and they're demanding that Gonzales step down. Well, should he? Well, sure he should step down. I mean, he should step off a cliff. But the fact is that their call for his resignation is a little bit suspicious because he is not the problem here. I think they think that by sacrificing him, they can put a stop to any kind of inquiry into something far larger than this one man's dishonesty or incompetence. What we're talking about here, what this whole U.S. attorney scandal is really all about, is election fraud. Now, we have to make a distinction here between election fraud and voter fraud. Clearly, one of the main reasons why these attorneys were fired is because they were refusing to follow up on leads of Democratic voter fraud. Now, voter fraud and election fraud are two different things. Voter fraud involves any effort by a specific individual voter to subvert the democratic process. Voting twice, for example, or registering to vote in the wrong place, as Ann Coulter was indicted for doing not long ago. These are examples of voter fraud. Retail fraud, to sort of the grassroots level. This is very different from election fraud, which is a systemic kind of fraud. We're talking about the party itself engaging in massive disenfranchisement of the adversary and large-scale concoction of votes for their own side. So it's important for us to understand what's going on here. The U.S. attorney scandal is all about the Republicans attempting to commit election fraud while screaming charges of voter fraud against the Democrats. Now let's take a look at some specific examples. Take David Iglesias in New Mexico. He was the U.S. attorney there. He was let go. But there's an interesting fact about the chronology of his story. Iglesias got a call from Heather Wilson, Republican representative in New Mexico, who was in trouble, and she wanted him to start an investigation into Democratic malfeasance as a way to boost her own standing in the polls. He wouldn't do it. There wasn't enough evidence. He then got a call from Senator Pete Domenici, who asked him for help with Heather Wilson's race. Again, Iglesias said he couldn't do it. There wasn't sufficient evidence. There was a long, sinister silence on Domenici's end of the phone. He then went to talk to Alberto Gonzales, and he said, Iglesias has to go. He's not helping us out. Gonzales told Domenici, I can't do it. I'm not doing it unless Bush gives the order. Well, a few days later, Iglesias was gone. Presumably, Bush gave the order. So, at the very least, what we need is an investigation into seeing how high up in the White House this instance of likely election fraud goes. And that was the election of 2006 we're talking about. Let's take a look at a few other examples of stuff that's been going on. The AP, Associated Press, has recently reported that more than 1 in 4 of the votes cast in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, were incorrectly recorded in this last election for a variety of reasons. Corrupted memory cards, missing or torn reports, faulty printers. The fact of the matter is that a whole lot of votes, over a quarter, were incorrectly recorded in a place where the Republicans have historically subverted the vote because there's just too many Democrats there. Wired has now reported that in Sarasota, Florida, there was in fact a software bug. Republicans there have been denying vociferously that there was any bug. This is the race where Democrat Christine Jennings lost by a mere 400 votes to right-wing incumbent Vern Buchanan, and 18,000 votes went missing. 18,000 votes went missing, and now it turns out that there was a software bug that certainly contributed to that disappearance. Now, these are all examples from 2006, when the Democrats ostensibly won. What, they won some 29 House seats? and they came closer to dominating the Senate. There was so much fraud, election fraud in 2006, in fact, that the Democrats arguably won at least 50 House seats and took the Senate. But the Democrats, like battered spouses, are perfectly happy to get whatever they can get, and they don't want to make waves. All right, let's go back to 2004 when some people did charge election fraud, and rightly so. There's a very explosive new report on the website freepress.org by Steve Rosenfeld and Bob Petrakis. This is something well worth your reading carefully. They have found out, first of all, that the same computer network that was used to host some of the secret White House emails in this latest Gonzales scandal were also used to host Ohio's official websites for vote counting and election results. They've also discovered that the Republicans in Ohio were aided in counting and tabulating the vote by an Alan Dillman, faculty member at Cedarville College, a Christian school, a guy who has a private company. That private company helped the Republicans to count the vote. Now, most explosive of all is the fact that the live returns on Ken Blackwell's site were frozen for 90 minutes, frozen, after it emerged that Kerry had actually won the votes in the large cities in the state of Ohio. During those 90 minutes when the website was frozen, all kinds of results came tumbling in from Ohio's rural Republican districts. And it turns out, and Free Press has proven this, that all those totals were based on fraudulent assumptions. So here is further evidence that Bush stole Ohio in 2004, further evidence that he should not be the president today because he was not reelected any more than he was elected in the first place. Now, this is not just about past elections. This is about future elections, too. In fact, it's about the future of American democracy. We're talking about an immense Republican drive to subvert the electoral process as a way for them to stay in power despite their minority status. In Arizona recently, a federal appeals court rejected an attempt by citizens to halt the enforcement of a new voter ID law. It was passed by the Republicans. The purpose of that law is to cut down on the number of Hispanic voters who might come out and vote against Republicans. In Texas, there are two astonishing laws now before the House. HB 218, which is the less egregious of these two laws, would demand that voters have, in addition to a legitimate voter registration card, a photo ID and two non-photo IDs. The second law would require people, when registering, to show up all kinds of documents like proof of citizenship and so on. Birth certificates could cost hundreds of dollars. It also would put an end to registration drives. Now, this kind of thing is happening in state after state after state. And yet all of this is small potatoes compared with the larger plot that Rove and Bush and Gonzales and all the rest of them have been pursuing for years now. What about the 85 U.S. attorneys who were not fired? They were presumably playing the game, so they were okay with the regime, and the regime kept them in place. Well, there's a lot of questions to ask about them. We should be looking at them instead of talking obsessively about Gonzales stepping down. For example, in Missouri, Bud Crimmins was the U.S. attorney until it emerged that he was investigating a law firm called Lathrop and Gage. Lathrop and Gage is the law firm of a ferocious Bolshevik activist named Thor Hearn. Thor Hearn started the American Center for Voting Rights, which is a phony grassroots group whose purpose is to ferret out and expose all cases of democratic voter fraud in the country. It is a propaganda mill. It's there basically to perpetuate the myth of widespread voter fraud by Democrats. His law firm was suddenly being investigated by the U.S. attorney. As soon as that became news, Bud Crimmins was out, and he was replaced by Timothy Griffin, a longtime Rove associate. Timothy Griffin is still the U.S. attorney in Missouri. What's he up to? Now, should we investigate all this? Well, yes. Should we be talking about impeaching the president and the vice president and all their men? Yes. Should we be talking about criminal investigations of treasonous behavior, the deliberate subversion of the American democratic process? Yes, we should, and we should be doing it as soon as possible.